Well then, Monica Hanaway, I am so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you. It'd be very interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
I know, me too. We are in relation in some other ways. It's specifically important to me that I open up your perspective to other people out there. Obviously, I'm a fan. I'm also a colleague. I really appreciate the work that you've been doing in the existential coaching space, also recently in the existential supervision space. So I know you're much more of a private person than I am. So
Yes,
I'm really glad that you said yes to this, because I think you have so much to contribute. And I know you tell stories in a way that have such a rich philosophical and theoretical framework around them. I know you reflect in a particular way. And that's what I wanted to open up to our audience so that they can get a bit of a grasp of your perspective on phenomenology and existential coaching. You work with leaders. You have worked conflict resolution with gangs in the north of the country. You've done so much. You've worked with musicians in the industry. You have a long history of organizational work. You're a fellow portfolio career multi-potentialite, as I might call you. So there's a lot there. I wonder how you sum yourself up. If you were to have a few minutes to say, well, this is me, how would you introduce yourself?
Well, I have to confess that I don't like summing anything up because I don't like limitations. So it's more tell you a bit about who I am and what I do rather than summing myself up.
Sure.
I'm tremendously lucky because I do have this diverse portfolio, as you say, which is fantastic. And because we're all complex people, we're not just about one thing and we don't have just one interest. And I've been so lucky to be able to work many different contexts, but all ones that I feel quite passionate about. So the music thing, I'm not a musician, but my partner is. And so that's always been part of my life while we've been together, and the tensions involved in that, and also the real elation and transformation that happens to artists and the real lows that can happen there. So that is one part of it. The conflict resolution work it was a real challenge to me because I think growing up as an eldest child, I saw myself more as about making everything all right for everybody. So learning to confront conflict and see it as creative and opportunistic too, that we can challenge the status quo, we can make significant change, wasn't an easy journey. So it wasn't my natural way of being to confront conflict, but it's led me into some really interesting work. So I do conflict resolution work with families, but also in the political sphere. So this morning I had a phone call which was about doing some work with Ukrainian and Russian employees in one organisation. So clearly there are real tensions there. It's taken me to South Africa to work with conflict which was around gender violence in the townships there. And it's taken me to work with paramilitaries in Belfast. So it's a very, very rich, and I feel very honoured that people trust me to enter their space and to be really open and quite vulnerable, because when we're in conflict, we are incredibly vulnerable. So all of that work is very rich for me. The organisational work, I come from having run organisations, so there's a real bit of my brain that likes the strategic and likes working through those kind of problems, which, because I also work as a therapist, I'm not about doing that for somebody else. So to go in and work as a consultant and a coach in organisations is, it feeds that bit of the brain, but it's also very much about grounding thinking in a different way for business, to make business leaders more aware that the work has to be meaningful, that as we've worked more and more hours, we've looked for meaning in our work time as much as we do in our personal life. So again, being able to do that and be invited into some big global companies with a very different message to the one that coaches and consultants usually bring is very exciting.
Mm-hmm. So before I want to pick you up on that, I wanted to highlight that you played a crucial, essential role in the first and I think still only Masters in Existential Coaching at the New School of Psychotherapy and Counseling. You developed that together with Emmy, and I think you've approached her for that project.
Yes.
You've co-authored the first book on existential coaching and written the Handbook on existential coaching. And most recently, this one, an existential and phenomenological approach to coaching supervision, which I'm really excited about because, I'm on board with we need a different kind of perspective in this field. And that's, I think, what you just alluded to. It's not just in coaching supervision. It's not just in coaching. It's also in organizations. It's also in conflict. So what is this different perspective that you're bringing into these situations?
I think it's a very humble perspective. So that quite often as coaches, we feel that we've got to have a whole mass of knowledge that we're going to take in somewhere. And the word coach for a lot of people is still connected to teaching, training. And there are elements of that in what I do, but it's much more philosophical. It's really hopefully getting people to stop and just think about themselves, their worldview, what their values are, where they get meaning from, what their relationship is to key existential issues like freedom and responsibility. And particularly at the moment, post-COVID, in the middle of what's going on politically, which is terrible, how we deal with uncertainty, how we deal with the world being thrown up around us. Even if it's the end of a relationship, we feel the world is thrown around us. How do we deal with that? And those are quite different approaches than most coaches will take, particularly into the business world. And coaches are not, I find that when I'm working with a global leader, they very often have quite a specific organisational dilemma. I sit down with them and I hear their stories. I hear their personal stories. They just open up. And people who are seen as being very work-driven, quite bullying, quite harassing, they know that. And quite often they will tell me that this is a response to the fact that they actually don't like their job. So working with somebody who'd gone in to a company as an intern and thought, I think I could do this better, was not interested at all in the subject of the company, and now is globally well known for running a company in that area. He has no interest in that area. So all his energy, all his time goes into that. And he resents it. And that resentment comes out and causes problems within the organisation and his relationships within the organisation. He didn't know where to find meaning. And so working with him as to what really he's passionate about and helping him to find ways of integrating that into his life is one example of the way the work tends to go. It's very much yes, we're in an organisation, we don't ignore that, we look at that, but also to go internally and look at what the meaning of the organisation is to that person, that individual. It may mean just to make money. And that's fine. But then it's like, okay, if that's not where your meaning's coming from, how can that money allow you to do what is meaningful rather than you just resent it? So there's a lot of kind of philosophical dialogue goes on. But also you need to ground it in the language of the business. You need to be aware of what they need to do, their 5-year strategies, the requirement to make money. You can't ignore all of that, and you have to respect it.
So there's often quite pragmatic, quite tangible, quite concrete dilemmas, challenges that coaching clients bring into the room. And I guess it would be easy to take them up on that and keep it quite practical. And I guess you do keep it quite practical, but you mentioned there's a philosophical perspective that opens. And I wonder what you do to invite that, because I'm sure other coaches would sit outside and say, well, I listen to people's stories and, we talk about responsibility and uncertainty. What makes it existential, and what is it in your approach that allows that conversation to happen, or perhaps even encourages that different perspective?
It's very difficult to say, because I think a lot of it is just about me being me and trying to be very authentically me. So I know a lot of the problems that they experience because I've had to deal with them myself in past roles, leadership roles. But I quite often I'm brought in because there's quite a big dilemma and it will involve quite a number of people. So it's not necessarily mediation, but there's a disagreement about, say, the direction of an organisation, or whether to move into another country, or quite big strategic decisions. And we could sit down and we could flip chart them and we could look at what's to be gained and what's to be lost, etc. But I always start with speaking individually to all the people involved, and really very much on the basis of, tell me what this means to you. How does this fit with what you want going forward? And grounding it very much in themselves. And then looking at, okay, what are you wanting long term? How much responsibility do you want in here? How much freedom? What is it that really excites you about this? What frightens you about this? So no different to lots of coaches, but that's my starting point, is very much grounded in the phenomena of themselves within the organisation and within their personal life as well. So I don't ask them about that, but it naturally flows from the type of questions that I'm posing, because if you start talking about what is it that really matters, why did you choose this job, this field, you very quickly move outside the organisational subject matter to their personal lives.
I think that might be a good window to talk about phenomenology, and it takes decades of study just to say the word, in my experience.
It certainly does. My younger daughter, when she was about 5, she said, oh, I love your job, Mum. So I said, oh, right. And she said, because when teachers say, what does your mum do? And I say, she's an existential phenomenologist, they just shut up. So she said it's a very good way of frightening people off.
Yeah, it's one of those big words that has a huge, complex history of study, lots of people, lots of different segments of it. And I'm always torn when I want to teach about phenomenology, because it's so valuable. It's so, at the essence, really simple to grasp, but then it has so many different arms and such a complex history that it can be difficult. It can be easy to get lost in it. So you've written about this, and I really like how you've written about it. So how do we translate this to a coach so that they can recognize the value and perhaps learn a little bit more about it?
I think it's about being incredibly open. So going in, and if somebody's telling you anything, do not dismiss it. Everything that is going on in terms of how they are with you, what they're saying to you, is telling you something and has to be respected. So, if somebody starts telling me about their dog, their cat, they're telling me something profound about themselves, and they've chosen to tell it to me in that context, and in a certain way. And it's not just avoiding. So there's a lot of schools of coaching which are very much about keep everything to the issue in hand. You've come with this particular task, keep the task in.
Don't talk about your cat. We're focused here.
Yeah. They'll say, let's bring us back to what we're meant to be talking about. Well, we are talking about it. People, we have to respect the people we work with. They know why you're there. They know what they want out of it. So they're telling you things for a certain reason. And the phenomena of that has to be respected and seen as being really valuable. So anything. I mean, an example from mediation might be useful, because it was a really tricky mediation with one man against 4 partners in a business, and they were talking about needing to dissolve the business, work through property rights, professional, like all sorts of quite nitty-gritty things. The guy on his own had been very aggressive throughout the whole mediation. I was working with a co-mediator, a man, and he needed to go off to the toilet at one point. So there's just me and this guy sitting in the room, and he changed his position in his chair. So it was like, okay, we're not working now, we're waiting for this guy to come back from the room. So I noted that there was this real softening in his way of being, in his tone, in the way he looked at me, everything. And he sat there and he said, oh, I just want to show you a photograph of my daughter, which was very different from the whole businessman that he'd been throughout the day. He got the photo of his daughter out and then started to tell me he was in the middle of a custody battle for this daughter. So for me, he was telling me 2 things. One, I am this really hard businessman and I've got enough money to take this to court and I can be very tricky. The other one is, I'm a lost, loving father who's scared. Mm-hmm. So he wanted me to see both aspects of him. Mm-hmm. And also to understand that he was feeling powerless at the moment in what was the most important bit of his life, which was his daughter. Mm-hmm. And the place that he could find his power was through being really aggressive in the mediation, threatening to go to court. And as soon as my co-mediator came back in the room, he put the photograph away. He went back into his man meets man aggressive mode. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we just let that ride. And then I said, I will have a private session with him. And we actually deconstructed what it was he'd been telling me, why he wanted me to know, which altered the whole process of the day. Right. He was very tearful. He understood that his feelings of powerlessness were being diverted onto the other partners.
Right. So you respected that he said that to you in private while the other person was out of the room. He waited for a reason for that to happen. You recognized it as something significant. Whether he was quite conscious of whether he wanted to tell you something or that or not, but you recognized that it's something significant. That I guess there are some assumptions about what that meant, but you bracketed those assumptions to then check in with this person later, but without breaching the confidentiality of having shared something in private.
Yes.
That bracketing seems crucial when we work phenomenologically. That we kind of put something in the box and the lid out, and push it aside what we think we know about a person. And yet, with the way you described it, you seem to have made a lot of assumptions of what he wanted to tell you, but also it seems that you've explored that later. So
yes, I mean, it's probably in the telling of it that, I mean, I was aware of those assumptions. We didn't do anything with them in the time that I was on my own with him then. Yeah. I asked for time with him later and said to him, I wonder why you did that.
Yeah. So I guess that's a question of mine, because with so much experience, with a growing amount of experience, it's very quick that we make some assumptions, conclusions, we pick up on certain things, and often they're probably spot on. But to me, it gets increasingly difficult to bracket assumptions the more we know. So how do you do that?
I think it's continually telling myself that it's quite arrogant to assume that my own assumptions are correct. Mm-hmm. And though, say experience will tell you most of the times they are, more or less, they're certainly on the right lines, but not to start working from the assumptions. The assumptions are there. We can't not have them, else we wouldn't be truly connected to the person. So we're going to have assumptions, but all they are things to be explored and not taken as I've got it now, I understand it now, because we cannot understand another person. I often say in training, don't say to the client, I understand you. We can't do that. We're not sitting in their shoes. We don't know. We've got a glimpse. We've got something like, I might be understanding this. Is this right? So all the time we're tentatively exploring assumptions. We don't ignore them, and we don't push them as being the right, but we don't ignore them to the scale that we don't explore them.
Yeah. And I think for many coaches, that's the dilemma, right? Because as soon as we say, I understand you, there is a bond, there is a connection, there is a resonance. And I think the clients really enjoy being understood. And we want to kind of do that. But this is where the existential comes in, right? It feels quite alone, not ever being fully understood by anybody, really.
Yeah. But that is the truth. That's the authentic truth, that we can't be. And it's a kind of a false alignment. It's a really, I think, simple and sloppy and lazy thing to do as a coach, to go, right, I understand you. Yes, we form a bond, but it's a bond. It's not truthful, it's not authentic, unless we've explored what it is we think we've understood.
And yet there's so many coaches out there, and it makes perfect sense, right? You've gone through something, you've went through a divorce, or you've went through a period of loss, or a lack of meaning in your life, some dilemma, a big challenge, you failed, you got fired, whatever it is, you got married, any experience that you might have a strong resonance with or strong experience. Then many coaches go and help people who also face those kind of challenges. And while there are many parallels, while there are probably things that we can share, tools, resources, tips, tricks, process or a structure to a conversation, there is a risk of making a lot of assumptions. The more we think we know something from our experience, I can see it both helping and not helping at the same time.
I think it's more dangerous when we kind of think, oh yeah, I've been through that. I know what that feels like. I don't know what that feels like for them. I mean, kind of an example, I love dogs. And when I've lost a dog, he's died, I feel terribly sad about it. And the danger is if somebody says to me, oh, my dog's died, I will go, oh, that's so awful. It leaves a terrible space. And they might go, well, it's died because I hated it. I've just had it put down. I've got to leave the space for their experience of their dog dying to sit in before, assuming that they're going to feel the same. And, the working phenomenologically and existentially is very much about deconstructing. And a funny story, not about work at all, was from years ago, but it always reminded me of this, was I used to go into London once a week to do a course. And it just so happened at the same time every week, somebody else was in the coffee bar I used to go into. Same person, we got talking, because we're always there for an hour waiting for different trains. And we talked about group dynamics, we talked about all sorts of things. And eventually, I don't know how many weeks after we started meeting up, this guy said, I go off to my TA group. That's what I'm doing here. And I said, oh, that's fascinating. I started talking about transactional analysis to him. He was going off to his territorial army group.
Right. Quite the assumption.
Yeah. And we talked about group dynamics. We talked about how groups work. We talked about, it transcended the different starting points and contexts. Yeah. But it was so funny. And I thought, keep your eye open for where your mind goes and jumps to. And people, come together from different starting points, or they never come together. But we hold our unique experience of the world and our unique take on what we experience.
Yeah. I've heard Irvin Yalom speak at an event. I think it was last year, maybe the year before. It was after he sadly lost his wife, and they had written a book together where the first part they wrote together, and then she died, and he's reflecting on his loss. I heard him say in that interview that he feels he's a better therapist now that he's experienced that kind of loss. And it threw me a bit because I always very much valued him as a phenomenologist, as you've just described it. And I've had that conversation. I've been talking about how coaching and psychedelics might be beneficial to each other for some time. And the thing I hear most from practitioners in the field is you need to have your own experiences with that. And I've been challenging that from this position that, you know, maybe it's not beneficial. Maybe it's even in the way. So, you know, that was a bit of a blow to me that I heard him say that.
Well, we don't know what he meant by that, though, whether he connected to something in himself which had opened him more, rather than it being, I've experienced what you've experienced.
Yeah. So far I've been, when I talk to people about this, I think it was more for the client, that the client feels that there is a sense of empathy, that we can identify. I like to say resonate, or, you know, with somebody's pain, rather than claiming that we know what they're going through. And I think that's a very important difference, is that we can still have use that we've had similar experiences, perhaps, you know, perhaps they're completely different. As you said, with the dog, somebody might be relieved, somebody else might be deeply saddened. But when we have a similar experience, or at least something has happened that clearly has parallels, I think clients feel that connection to us. And I think we need to be careful as practitioners that we don't make assumptions based on our own experiences.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, sometimes it can be very helpful, but, you know, to share that that's something you've also been through. But I think you have to be really careful about it. And you have to have had enough time given over to their experience, the phenomena of what it meant to them, and how they're sitting with it, before you join that in any way. And I think
the benefit.
The whole issue of whether coaches, therapists, you know, people working in personal connection should have similar experiences to the clients, or should be the same gender, should be the same race, should be the same colour, is a fascinating one. You know, because my own belief is that I do the best work probably with people that I've got least in common with, because I've got less to bracket.
Yeah, and yet the interesting thing is that with how marketing often works, and I guess that's why it really helps you to be more of a private person and not so much out there. People often approach me because they are quite familiar with my views and my philosophical stance, or what I'm interested in, stories in my life. So I think a lot of coaches experience that their clients come to them based on knowing what they stand for, what their worldview is, their values, their beliefs, their gender, their color, you know.
I think all of my clients will have come to me because they do know what I stand for. Whether it's important I'm black, white, male, female, I don't know. I think for a lot it isn't. And pretty much all of the people that I work with have come from recommendations from other people I've worked. So they're not, as you say, I'm quite private, so they're not, you know, they're not coming through media. They're coming because somebody said, actually, I think you might find talking to Monica useful, or Monica might be a good person to come in and help the organisation at this point. Again, you know, it's difficult. I had a client who, Afro-Caribbean guy, who came, and he said he wouldn't have gone to a black coach because a lot of the difficulties he was experiencing were around negative feelings he had about blackness. And he said that was really hard to own, to a black coach because he felt he would have been politically told, that he was wrong. And yet he needed to talk about that. He needed to talk about that in a space he felt safe. Once we'd done the work, he was able to go and talk about that in black groups very bravely and express it. But he needed that transitional space in which to just feel he could say whatever he wanted to say without any political judgment being made. And I think existentially, that's what we've got to be able to offer as well, working with the paramilitary groups, the gangs. I did not share their philosophy of life. But I was very authentically interested to know their journey to their thinking.
Yeah, and this is where we need to be super aware what's going on for us and what our own worldview and beliefs is, so that we can bracket that if it's necessary. And when I say necessary, it's like, what is in the client's best interest? In the client's best interest is not perhaps to challenge them on something that we believe is right or wrong. One of Bruce Peltier's guidelines is to reinforce your client's point of view. And I've recently had a group who really struggled with that, because what if the client's point of view is wrong or unethical? And that led to really interesting conversations about, well, what do I believe is right or wrong? Is there a right and wrong out there? And what do I do as a coach when I don't agree with where my client is going? And you referenced a couple of examples now in this conversation where you didn't share your client's point of view, but you still made an effort to, reinforce it. You certainly accepted it.
I wouldn't say reinforce. It was to explore it, to not agree with it, not disagree with it, but to explore it. And there's some powerful work that I've seen, again, in conflict resolution world, where working with a woman whose father had died as a result of an IRA bomb, and she met up with the man who'd laid the bomb.
Oof.
And they had some very powerful conversations, and she came away from that and said that they would never see eye to eye on it, because she was a pacifist. She didn't think that there was any moment when violence was justified. He definitely felt that violence was justified for a cause that he believed in. But she said talking to him made her realise that he truly believed that in what he was doing was for the benefit of most people. That made her feel that her father hadn't just been thrown away, that his death had meaning to the man who killed him. Very powerful. I couldn't find that amount of it wasn't forgiveness, it was acceptance, because she said, I don't forgive him, I don't agree with him. But I can accept that there was a reason and a meaning in what he did. And the two of them have travelled around war zones since he came out of prison and talked to different sides.
Wow.
And it's that, that is, I don't think I could ever get anywhere near that woman's amazing acceptance. But that's what I try and aim for, a sense of, I'm not going to collude with something I don't agree with, but I will stay in the space of saying, okay, breathe, but tell me about yourself. Tell me how you come to those views. And there have been two clients that I've said, okay, well, I can't work with you. I don't want to work with you because our values are too far apart. I mean, I do some work which comes via the police with sex offenders, and there was one person there that I just said, no, he very much believed that what he did, that he could justify it. And his history I could see, but I just thought, I don't want to work with this value set.
Yeah, so it can be coherent in their own frame of reference, and you can develop some understanding of how you really truly believe that you did the right thing here, or that this is justified. But I, as a practitioner, have a choice of whether I want to support that person.
Yes.
Which, I guess it's knocked on the door a couple of times, given the examples that you've offered. They're huge issues around identity, blackness, death. These are big things. So the question is there: when does it become therapy? I mean, you are trained obviously as a therapist. You've been working as a therapist for many years. Where's that line for you? When is it? I mean, does it even matter to you because you have that extra safety net?
It matters quite a lot because of what I've contracted with the client, and to have safe boundaries for both of us about what. So I don't do life coaching because that for me is the area where there's most danger of actually having a boundary that moves too much. So I don't do that.
It doesn't sound like you're not doing that. It sounds like you hear a lot of stories about people's lives in a different context.
Yeah, but that's holistically who they are, and acknowledging that within the framework of organisational work or whatever. As a therapist, I don't do brief therapy work. So I do long-term work with people, long-term in-depth work. And so it's, because we are holistic creatures, we can never separate out the personal. And it may be that at times I'll say to people, this is touching very much on therapy work. And I wouldn't interface the two. I would either say, we've finished that work here and you find a therapist, or we finish the coaching work and we move into therapy.
Mm-hmm. So there's when do you say that? Maybe it's best to exemplify that. Could you tell us about a time where you've said, well, this is no longer coaching. I think maybe we need to start going into therapy. And how would you have that conversation?
Let me think. Because I think by the fact that I don't offer life coaching, it's been less of an issue. So, but certainly with some of the work I've done with leaders, and I don't know whether I just make people cry, but quite often people, quite strong people end up in tears. And I would say then that, it looks like there's a lot of pain that they may need to look at, and that we can't do that under the coaching label. Is that something that they think they would like to take to therapy? Because it will need, a very different contract. If you're talking about weekly work, which again, because a lot of the coaching I do is business and organisation, it's more likely to be fortnightly, monthly, but not an intense weekly. And it's open-ended, whereas the coaching that I do with business on the whole is, got a number of sessions, but not always.
Yeah.
And generally, you mentioned at the beginning that transformation, in order to transform work, organisations, communities, we have to transform individuals. So, the two things are always there. You can't ignore all the areas that we operate in, all the existential dimensions, social, physical, psychological, spiritual. I'm looking to create some level of understanding in myself about how they fit in all of those areas.
I'll love to take a transition on that because I told you I'm going to be curious about your perspective, the existential perspective on transformation. So what does that mean to transform from your perspective?
Again, I think there are a number of kind of definitions of that. Sometimes you're invited in to transform. There's a specific issue that you're being asked, particularly within organisations and business. Can you come in and transform the ethos of this organisation? Can you come in and transform this directorate team to a coherent team rather than lots of individuals vying for supremacy in it? So there's some things that are quite transactional part of it. So you've got quite a clear message. But any interaction we have, so you and I talking today, has the potential to be transformational. I will take something away from today and think, I've never really thought about that too much before. And I will take it away and it will transform my thinking. Maybe not a lot, maybe a tiny bit, maybe a lot, I don't know. And I will be transformed as a result of that. So we've got this incredibly rich opportunity for both the coach and the client to be transformed by it. It's not a one-way thing. So everybody I've met in my life, has had some impact on me. It may have helped me to affirm my own beliefs, or it may have challenged my beliefs. So it's not a goal. So there's an aspect which may be goal orientated, which might be about changing organisation or team or something. But there's also something that is just the process, the very process of being, because coaching, therapy, conflict is terribly intimate. Because if we can, our first step in any of those professions is to build trust, to build a working alliance. So I don't go into any of those as a kind of expert. I'm a kind of hand holder on their journey.
A hand holder?
Yeah. Going, have you noticed there's a big crater ahead? Or, there's light shining through those trees. Shall we have a look what's there? So, but the choice is theirs. I'm not saying we will go this way or we will go that way. It's trying to kind of help explore the possible ways that are there and what might be dangerous, like, we're going to trip over this log, or what are opportunities. If we go through those trees, we may see a wonderful sunset or something.
Yeah, I've heard you describe it as a companionship in your new book.
Yeah.
So transformation isn't necessarily something big. It's this big word, or often regarded as this big word. But from hearing you talk about it, it can be very small transformations, small changes in mindset or in psychology, or just an insight that somehow changes and transforms who you are. Yeah,
and that there's the possibility for transformation, because many people, coming to coaches feel stuck. And I don't think it's our job to transform them. I think it's our job to help them to see ways in which they may transform themselves.
Yeah.
And to really work with them about, okay, what if you get that? What if that transformation what's the gains? But what's also the losses? What do you leave behind if you transform? Is that something you will miss and grieve? Because we can be very, we can get so excited and charge ahead and then think, is this really where I wanted to be? So it's holding the kind of what, the kind of shadow side of our decisions, as well as getting excited about the potentialities. And I think that's part of our responsibility, that we can get so excited about somebody's kind of go, right, that's really changed my mind and I'm going hell for leather. And we can kind of go, brilliant job, coach, well done, my ego's great. And I think we've got a responsibility to say, that does sound fantastic. Now let's look at what the losses may be.
Yeah, and it's really helped me, that existential lens, in appreciating and acknowledging that somebody who comes to a coach to create some sort of change or transformation, they're facing loss of who they used to be or who they are right now, because even a small change leaves something behind. So I think a lot of the times that's why people struggle with moving forward or making progress. And talking about responsibility, I see that a lot in coaches taking the responsibility for creating the transformation. And what we're selling when we sell coaches is the possibility of that sort of change. But people, like so many coaches, it weighs so heavy on them because they take the responsibility. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about the existential perspective on responsibility. And we are free to make all of these decisions as coaches. We need to define ourselves as coaches. What kind of coach am I, and how am I going to do my marketing, and how am I going to talk to a client? What can I promise them? Can I speak with any certainty? Because if I do speak with certainty and I'm confident, then people are going to buy into my services. So, but then when I do that, it just often doesn't quite feel right, or it weighs heavy on them because now they found themselves having committed to something that maybe they cannot control. Or perhaps certainly they cannot control. It's a better way of putting it.
I mean, there's a whole list of quite deep questions there.
Oops.
But there's one about the responsibility of the coach, and one is the responsibility of the client. And my responsibility as a coach, for me personally, coming from existential phenomenological approach, is to be authentic, to not promise anything that, even if I think I can deliver it, I don't promise it. So I'll just say, I will work with you on that and we'll see where we go. And the responsibility, I have to remember all the time, is theirs. Their responsibility to choose what they do at the end of the coaching or in the coaching is theirs. My responsibility is to ensure that I've provided enough space and openness and trust for them to explore all the consequences and implications of that choice. And then take responsibility for the choice they make at the end, knowing what the losses are, knowing that they're entering into uncertainty, because that's the thing that I sometimes struggle with, that some coaches seem to offer certainty. And existentially, we can't. There's no such thing. And, the world is showing us that in neon lights at the moment, isn't it? And that we have to help the client to live with uncertainty, not to falsely promise certainty. That if you do this or do that, this will happen, which is why I have problems with self-help books and the rest of it, because we're all individuals and we don't know what will happen. And the role of the coach is, how will you be with not knowing what will happen? Okay, we've done all this work, you've decided this path seems the most in line with your worldview and what you want. You're going to take that Kierkegaard's leap of faith into the void. And then what? And I can't, as a coach, say, you do this, you do that, this is what will happen. I can say, when others I've worked with, or when I myself have done that, this is what's happened, but I don't know. Because we are, contextual. We're beings in the world with others. We are not free agents other than to say, this is my choice for me. There are implications for everybody around us in everything we choose to do. And I see that as my responsibility and duty as a coach, to just make sure that I've allowed space for that and not got carried away in enthusiasms. It's so easy to do because it's delightful as a coach. You see somebody come up with really wonderful creative ways forward, and how you can kind of hold that excitement and passion without just throwing them into something, without challenging, okay, well, what's the losses there? What might be the things that you're going to find difficult psychologically with that?
Yeah, and I think in an age where there's so many more coaches coming into the market with, the blueprints for how you market yourself as a coach, and I think clients seeking coaching are often bombarded with these messages of certainty. And in my experience, when they're being met with, look, I don't know, ultimately it's your responsibility and I can't do the work for you, I'm pretty confident that what you're trying to do can be done, because I've seen other people doing similar things before, but I don't want to make assumptions whether you're in the same position, because ultimately we're all very different people, different experiences. I think clients appreciate the authenticity and the freshness, unfortunately, of being met with somebody who's relating to them in this way and not claiming that they have the solution and there's a money back guarantee and this is a certainty thing and here are 10 easy steps to do it. So in my experience, it actually sells quite well, even though that seems like a paradox.
There's a real tension, I think, because we all kind of want easy solutions to everything. If somebody could say, okay, you want a bigger house, so all you have to do is this, and this. Wouldn't it be wonderful?
People craving it's attractive.
Fantastic. Yeah. So it's very attractive, and I've had feedback in the past from somebody who I rate who said, I don't think you'll get lots of clients. This was early on in my career, because you're not selling what they want, and you don't sell it in the right way. You don't come across, you don't ask enough money, was one of the things that I was told. You don't sort of come across in a sort of arrogant way, and you don't tell them, I'll sort it out.
Yeah, you got to be more confident. You got to speak with more certainty when you talk to clients, is what a business coach once told me.
Yes. And I said, but I have to live with myself. I want to be authentically me. And so it's going to be a slow burn. It's going to be people who kind of risk it and benefit and tell others. And there's a good example of, why I don't make much money and all the rest of it was, I was asked to go into an organisation and they were having a terrible time, partly because the boss was seen as a bully and possibly a drug addict and all sorts of things. And the directorate team, it was a global company, were at odds with one another, and I was asked to sort of go in and sort it out through group coaching. And did that. I worked with each of them individually, and then we had a whole day of group coaching, and it went really well. I worked with them for 2 years over. And at the end, the guy who owned the company put me out for a meal at the end to say thank you, and he said, I've got something I'd really tell you, he said, and I don't normally tell people we employ this, but he said, we had somebody come in to do that work before you. And he came in and he didn't speak to everybody individually first. He did a group coaching for which he charged for the day £15,000.
Oh.
And he said, and he completely fucked it up. He made it worse. It was terrible. He went back to the guy, and the guy said, very, very difficult group. I'm going to have to do another day, and because they're so difficult, it will be 20k.
Wow.
And he said, are you going to ask me for more money now? Because I said no, because I said what I thought the work was worth to me in terms of my time. I've done that. It's worked. I said, I feel a bit pissed off now that you've told me that. But no, I'm not going to ask you for any more money, because that was the contract. That's what I offered. That's what I did. But you're working in a context where you've got a lot of people offering a lot of things for a lot of money. Some of them not knowing what they're doing. Some of them not really caring. And existentially, I don't think if you're working existentially, it's because you want to make money. It's because you believe in a certain philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I'd love to pick you up on the ethics there and in relation to responsibility, in relation to coaching, because what we're trying to do is encouraging our clients to take the responsibility in their learning journey.
Yes.
And I recently had a conversation where we talked about the responsibility that coaches and also supervisors take in their training journeys. Because what I've seen I've been involved in a bunch of different trainings, courses, schools, is that a good chunk of the students who come in seem to pay for a service and then expect entry into a profession.
Yes.
And I see people not doing the reading, doing relatively little reading, expecting that they would get connected to practice clients, or that with their certification at the end of such a course, they would just being given the business. And I think a lot of coaches really struggle with building the business afterwards.
Yeah.
But that's one kind of part of the conversation. But the responsibility part is one that's very important to me, is that we encourage our clients to take responsibility. But I see a lot of people in trainings just kind of doing what they need to be doing and then expecting the system to give that back to them. And I wonder if you've seen something like, I'm not sure if there's a specific question I wanted to ask, but I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this.
I totally agree with you. I've experienced that quite a lot. You know, that people who have done my training courses will say at the very beginning and repeat it during the courses that it's hard work and nobody's going to just come to you out of thin air at the end of the course. You'll have the skills, you'll have the understanding, you'll have the philosophy, but you've got to go and do the work. And you're right. I mean, a lot of people just don't do the work. And you'll know yourself, it takes hours, months, years to build your practice and to build it properly and ethically. And I get phone calls quite often, you know, from people, well, I haven't had a client, or I haven't had a mediation. And I say, well, what have you done? And they'll say, well, I've set up a website, is usually the answer. Yeah, and I said, you know, what is it you're offering? Because if you're offering a companion, for example, to use that as a metaphor, we're quite rightly very careful who we choose as our companions, aren't we? And you've got to go out there and meet people. So in terms of, you know, building up coaching business and conflict resolution business, and you know, I've spent hours going out and talking to people, and you don't get the work back, or you get it back years later, or you know, you're going out to talk to HR departments, and then they promise all sorts of things, nothing happens. You contact them and go, oh, well, that person left that you talked to. Can you come and do your spiel again? You know, and you have to just say, if this is the work you want to do, you have to commit to it. You know, and should we be finding clients for people? No, I don't think so. If I have an approach from somebody and I can't do it, or I think I'm not the best person for it, then I will recommend people. But I don't kind of run a kind of dating agency. You know, it's like you've got to go out there, be yourself, be clear about what you're offering, what your style is, and then people will choose. You know, there's what's our responsibility if we're trainers in terms of maybe saying to some people, maybe you're not the right person to be doing this kind of work, or maybe this isn't the right approach for you. Because some people will be brilliant at being very, very directive coaches, you know, and that's fine. And that's for a certain context, but that's what they need to be putting themselves out there as, so people know what it is they're getting.
Yeah, and I really like coaching for that
Yeah,
breadth
yeah,
of the range of what kind of practitioner you can be. You
yeah,
know, often it's very easy to listen to voices who say, this is coaching and this is how it should be, and this is not coaching what you're doing. And when I kind of freed myself from claiming that I know the way,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know, it was very, very helpful, and I could actually appreciate and respect coaching approaches that go quite opposite to how
yeah,
I would coach. And that I still think that sometimes when I criticized certain approaches to coaching in a particular context, it probably wasn't the most helpful approach to help this person, you know, and I still believe in that.
yeah,
Sometimes you're going to be much better served or much better helped if you work with a particular kind of therapist or a particular kind of mentor or a
yeah,
particular kind of teacher. You know,
yeah,
I often say we send our kids to school and we expect the teacher to teach them and not necessarily say, what do you want to learn about and how does it feel like? And
yeah,
then
yeah,
just hold space for them. I know there's some education approaches that, you know, manifest that, and that's also really helpful.
yeah,
But we do expect some people to put knowledge on the table and
yeah,
say, what do you think about that? We know this.
yeah,
And so I think I respect any coach now who is able to communicate what it is that they're doing,
yeah.
and then let their client decide whether this is the right kind of help that they would like.
I think that's right, and it's also going to depend on what the client might want at one particular time. So you
Hmm.
may be working with a client around something quite broad, and they may require, they might say, I've got this big presentation to give, and I need some coaching about how to do a presentation.
Hmm. Yeah, you do
And
not want to work with an existential coach if that's your outcome.
yeah. But equally, it's hard, because I think I could do that. I do offer training on presentation skills, etc.,
Hmm.
which is outside that. And that's when you've got to work with that dilemma yourself as a coach, isn't it?
Hmm.
What is this relationship, this coaching relationship that I'm in now?
Yeah, and what are my
Uh,
hats? What are my hats that I can employ within this
yes,
relationship?
yeah,
So it can be difficult to say, well, I'm a transformational coach now and I do this kind of work. And then
yes,
somebody comes with something that we could really help them with.
yeah,
But that would mean we need to put a different hat on.
yeah. And I think sometimes you can do that within the relationship and actually say, well, I'm going to step out of what we're doing now. And if you do want, 2 hours on how to give a presentation, we can do that.
Yeah.
Another time, another place.
Yeah. And that's not going to be coaching as I understand it, although I think coaches
It'll
care a
still be
lot
under
more.
the, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I
it will
think
be under
coaches
the, yeah,
yeah, I think coaches care a lot more about what it is that they call themselves than their
yeah,
clients usually do. They care about whether you can help them with something.
yeah. And that's why I think it's great if people can put things very articulately on websites and the rest of it. But most of the time, people don't, I've never been asked, what kind of coach are you? What kind of therapist are you? People know that I work in a certain way because they've met somebody I've worked with. So they will understand it's existential phenomenology. They won't know the words. We will never use them.
Hmm. Yeah.
It's about embodying the philosophy, isn't it, of your own value set, which happens for me to coincide with the existential phenomenological. I mean, I was
Hmm.
trained, many, many decades ago as a Freudian analyst.
Hmm.
And I found it incredibly interesting intellectually. Felt like being Sherlock Holmes. It was great. And you can never be wrong as a Freudian analyst, because if your client disagrees with you, it's their defense mechanism. But I knew in my soul that this didn't fit well with me. It fitted with my head. I liked it. It was good fun. But we've got real people here, and the
Yeah.
fact that I could just deny anything that they experienced as
Yeah.
or make sense of it in terms of a particular theory, I knew wasn't true.
I resonate a lot because, as you know, my wife is a Lacanian analyst.
Yes.
Would probably disagree with lots of that particular approach to Freudian work, because
Yeah.
I think a lot of that hasn't been translated very well, and through the British School of Analysis has morphed into something different. But we argue passionately about the right way of working with people. So I do think there is a good match as a practitioner for a particular time in your life. I mean, I worked with an ontological coach before I worked with a business, not even a coach, more of a mentor, I reckon. And that was a really helpful combination to do some of the foundational work, to come to terms with who am I as a business person, and then move on into, well, I need to learn some business practices actually, and how to have a sales conversation in a way that would sit well with me. So I think that's really helpful, and that's what I appreciate coaching for as well.
That's broad breadth of things that,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm having an eye on the time. I just wanted to check quickly. I have not had a look at my questions at all, but I think we've pretty much covered everything that I wanted to talk to you about, or at least touched on it sufficiently so people can go and learn some more.
Is there anything you feel that I've not been clear about that you think might have raised more sort of confusion?
It's difficult to say. I've been constantly trying to bracket what I think I know and kind of put myself into a listener's or viewer's kind of mindset. I'd appreciate people's questions. You might not be available for them. I'd love to get some discussion going, because I think these kind of conversations, for me at least, they're meant to spark conversations either within you who are listening or watching this, or take it out to your friends, colleagues, reflective spaces, discussion groups, student meetups, peer groups, supervision. That's what they're supposed to do. So
I think this is what, going back to what I was saying about transformational, it's these drip feeds that go, and you may never know what the ultimate transformation was. Mm-hmm. You may not see it, the person who starts the transformation process.
Seeds.
It's, or water dropping, that will eventually form a lake, but we might not live to see it. It's but it is that sense of just kind of setting the process of questioning up. Mm-hmm. It's not about answers, it's about more and more questions, isn't it?
Yeah. And when you come out with more questions than answers, that's probably a good thing. But I appreciate that it can feel a bit frustrating. Hopefully people who are listening to this have a lot more questions now than answers.
Okay, good.
If somebody wanted to learn more, obviously, I really encourage people to look into the books you've written about co-mediation. You mentioned you've written a book on that. There was one on tales in conflict resolution. What's the title of that exactly?
It's called Psychologically Informed Mediation.
Right. And just wonderful case studies, and then looked at from a reflective lens of how does the theory and the framework fit to it. I just love that process of yours.
Starting with the person, following with the theory. And I think that was the change from the Freudian analysis, that coming into existential, it's about, yes, we've got a body of theory. We have got that. We've got philosophy, but it follows the client, not the other way around.
Experience first.
That's why the book is set up like that. You get the client story first, and then a kind of, really my reflections on it.
Yeah, and that's, if you think about it, that's how pretty much every TED Talk is set up these days. There's a story, an experience, and then somebody's making sense of it or explaining how a theoretical construct has formed from the experience. That's phenomenological inquiry. That's what the approach is about. So a couple of more books there. Explore it. Is there anything else that you would want coaches to know?
No, I'm quite happy for them to have my email and they can contact me, and I'm interested in dialogue. I am, as you said, very busy, but I want to learn more, and questions help me learn more. I may have an answer of sorts, or I may just think, wow, that's an interesting question.
That is wonderful. Do you want to state your email now? We can also put it in the show notes.
It's all small case, and it's Monica with a C Hanaway, Hanaway, at ntlworld, all one word, .com.
Wonderful. Monica, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate your time and your perspective. And I know we will be speaking again soon. Maybe we can do it publicly again sometime soon.
Okay, lovely. Okay, bye for now then, Yannick.
Bye-bye.